Okay, so here's the deal, guys. I have spent an unbelievable amount of time trying to get the video to sync up with the Prezi in like where I'm up here and the Prezi is right here. And it is possible, but I don't know why I can't do it right now. So what we're gonna do is for this one, I'm just gonna say open up the Prezi yourself. Uh, if you want it, text me. I'll give you the information to get onto the Prezi website so that you can follow along with me, and I will attempt to get the fill in the blank pages. I do have that on a Google Doc, so I'll have an attempt to have that in the what do you call it down below, the description down below. So this is the third or fourth time that I've recorded this video. So if I feel like I'm rushing, if I seem like I'm rushing through this some, it's because I am, because I'm kind of sick of this and ready to go into the Reformation. But if you're looking at our Prezi, and I'm going to talk for the rest of the video like you are looking at the Prezi, so just know, I'm assuming that you're looking at the Prezi. First off, we're looking at the hierarchy and terminology. So, starting off with the hierarchy, you have kind of the pyramid shape of their leadership structure. You have first off the Pope, which is what we're going to do first. Thank you, Megan, for throwing her in. So, the Pope is also known as the Holy See. And it is spelled S-E-E. I don't know why it's spelled. I don't know why that's what it's called. And as we're going through this, I'm going to attempt to have definitions thrown in where we need them. And then at the end of the video, we're going to look at some other definitions as well as the Catholic Bible to see the differences in all of that. But it is known as the Holy See, which is more of a political term, where Pope is his religious title. The Holy See is his political title, which basically just means King of the Vatican. The Vatican being the base of the Catholic Church. And when Mussolini gave the Vatican to the Catholic Church as its own individual country, he kind of put the Holy See in charge, not that Pope at the time, but the Holy See as a whole. So whoever is the Pope is also the Holy See, and that person runs the Vatican. They also see the Pope as infallible. Infallible means inability to be wrong, unable to be wrong. And this is where you need the Prezi, but I have a little Chuck Norris meme here that it always makes me think of. When Chuck Norris, I know a Chuck Norris, a lot of you do too, but Chuck Norris misspells a word, all English dictionaries have to be updated because Chuck Norris can never be wrong. And that's basically the idea with the Pope. If he says something spiritual, they have to change the Bible because he can never be wrong on spiritual matters. And this is something that I learned myself going through this, is that the Pope is not perfect. They do not see the Pope as perfect. They just see him as infallible on spiritual matters. So the Pope can sin. And he actually does do confession with his own personal priests. And just imagine being that priest. I don't know if y'all can see this in the background. My wife is attacking our dog with our baby. It's quite interesting. So, the requirements to be Pope before all of this is he doesn't have to be a cardinal, but he has to be a cardinal. So there have been times where you see priests and bishops elected directly to popeship, and we'll get into what all those words mean. But we have seen people from lower statuses become the Pope, but it's been like 650 years since anybody has been elected from below a cardinal to the Pope. So pretty much, it's not a written rule, but it's a rule. The Pope has to be a cardinal before he is a Pope. The Catholic Church claims that there has been 266 popes. There has not been 266 popes. That's why there's an asterisk there. And with that, I don't know how many popes there actually have been. For all I know, there could be 265. But this is why there is not 266, because they claim that the first pope was Peter. They draw that from this verse in Matthew 16:18. And also I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. So the first reason that we're going to look at why this does not mean that Peter was the Pope is actually Greek. And I know I spend a good bit of I put a lot of effort into not talking about the Greek, but this is a time when the Greek is actually very helpful. So the Greek word for Peter and the Greek word for rock are actually the same word. Now, I've heard a lot of people talk about how Peter means pebble and rock means giant boulder. I'm not really sure how that's true because they're basically the same word, but there are a lot of people a lot smarter than me when it comes to Greek. But what I do know is that you can see these have the same root word, and the whole Greek language is kind of, think about how English words are made plural. You have the same root word and then you put an S on the end. And it's kind of like Greek words. You have the root word and then the last 1 to 5 letters decide whether it's going to be a verb or a noun or a past tense, present. All of that stuff is decided in the last couple of letters. So here you have Petros and Petra. Petros, which is Peter, means masculine. So you have the root word there, P-E-T-R, and then over on the other side you have rock, P-E-T-R, and then A, and that is feminine. So you look at this in the Greek, what it was written in, and you see that these are two completely different, have to be two completely different things that Jesus is talking about, because one is masculine and one is feminine, and the Greek language does not work that way. The word rock would have to be masculine talking about Peter. So you look back at what was it that Jesus was actually talking about when he says this. And this verse comes from when Jesus is having this conversation with his apostles. Who do men say that I am? Some say this, some say that. Who do you say that I am? And of course, loudmouth Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So what he was saying is, you are Peter, and he might have been. You are Peter, pebble, small rock. But what he was saying is, on this rock, on this statement that you have made, that you are Christ, the Son of the living God, that's what I'm going to build my church on. Not you as an individual, not you as a man, but that statement. And not only that, you look a little bit later on in Galatians 2, you see where Paul is writing about, when we'll just read it, Galatians 2:11. But when Cephas is Paul, it's another name for Paul. So he kind of, or excuse me, Peter. Cephas is Peter. So he kind of has 3 names: Simon, Peter, Cephas. Hello, Archie. But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. You look more into why Peter stood condemned, and it's because this is after the Gentiles were accepted into the faith, and Peter still did not associate with Gentiles. That's a spiritual matter. So if Peter was the first pope, he was wrong on this spiritual matter. Not to mention the fact, I don't know what Paul was to the Catholic Church. I don't know if he was supposed to be a priest or a bishop or cardinal, whatever he was supposed to be, but obviously not in this time, because the Catholic Church did not exist during this time. But early in the Catholic Church, if you were to have opposed the Pope to his face in public, you were going to be killed. So Paul would have been killed for this. So there's no possible way that Peter was the first pope. But all that is what the papacy is. He just kind of runs the Catholic Church, and in all reality, when you're talking about what the Pope does from day to day, from moment to moment, the Catholic Church doesn't let out a lot of that information. Probably a lot like the president, honestly. Just meetings, making decisions, being the face of it all. But under the Pope, you have what's known as cardinals. And the cardinals, again, I'm not entirely sure what cardinals do all day, but they are advisors to the Pope. So they advise the Pope and they're elected by the Pope. So think of cardinals as the Pope's cabinet. So they're around the Pope trying to make sure that he makes the right decisions. But their biggest role outside of that is to elect the new Pope. So when one Pope dies, it's up to the cardinals to elect the next one. And one of the very strange things about the cardinals and electing a new pope is you have to be under a certain age, and it's somewhere in the 80s. So you'd think it would be over a certain age, but actually, if you pass that age, you can no longer vote on who the pope is. But they elect a pope, and the requirement is you must be a priest. And again, we'll get to what a priest is. Just remember, to be a cardinal, you have to be a priest. You can skip the role of bishop. And there are currently 207 cardinals, which sounds like a pretty big number when you're talking about one pope. But when you start looking into how many Catholics and how many bishops and priests there are, 207 is a tiny, tiny number. So there's not really a lot of cardinals. And cardinal is a powerful position. They do have a lot of sway, but I would say this position right here, the next one, the bishops, are the ones that can do the most damage, or I say do the most damage because all of these scandals you see the Catholic Church associating themselves, or that they are associated with. Um, the bishops are really the ones that mess all that up. They're the ones that have the power to let that continue. They're the ones who really have a lot of say over at least certain areas, because what a bishop does is it rules over a diocese. So I'm just now looking back at my camera and I realize you can't see the fact that my dog is acting like an idiot over here. So he's distracting me. So a bishop rules over a diocese, and that is basically just a region, just an area. And you can see here how the U.S. is broken down, and you can kind of see, if you're on the Prezi, you see that Mississippi is broken down into 2 dioceses to cover up all of Mississippi. And in the U.S., there's 197 dioceses, and there are 2,886 worldwide. But somehow there are 5,100 bishops. I don't know what the other almost half. So I don't know. Go away. I don't know what the almost half of bishops are doing, since they are not. There's not enough dioceses to rule over the. Excuse me. There's not enough dioceses for every bishop to rule over. So I don't really know what the other half are doing, but there are about 5,100 bishops worldwide and 2,886 dioceses. So along with these bishops and dioceses, there are archbishops and archdioceses. And again, if you're on the Prezi, you can kind of see a picture of how fancy the get-up for an archbishop is. At least that's sometimes what they wear, not all the time. But really, this is just the leader or the lead church of a province. And a province is just what makes several dioceses coming together to be one province. So you can see here how the provinces are broken down, and where Mississippi and Alabama are both broken down into 2 dioceses, so that's 4 altogether. They are all one province. So while there's 4 dioceses between Mississippi and Alabama, there is 1 diocese and 1 archbishop. So there's 45 of those in the U.S., and I couldn't tell you how many are worldwide. I couldn't find that information. But this is a term that I didn't really realize the definition of. Each diocese has a cathedral. I thought a cathedral was basically just the building for a Catholic church, but what it is the location of the bishop. It's kind of the leading church in that diocese, and that's where the bishop does his work from. But that leads us on into, and as we go on, these are getting simpler and more simple and more simple from here on out, because there's only two more. But you have priests. Priests, if you're on the Prezi, this is legitimately the least creepy picture I could find of a priest on the first page of Google, and I don't like y'all enough to go past the first page of Google Images, so that's the picture we went with. But he runs a parish, and a parish is just a smaller area in a diocese. Just think the community, a church. He runs a church, and think preacher without elders. He runs that area, and there's about 500,000 priests, which is a terrifyingly huge number. Because these men have to be educated, they have to go to college, and there's that many that do and are that educated on the Bible and still become priests, which is terrifying to me. But that's about it on a priest. You move on to the last category, and you have a deacon. And props to the Catholic Church for using a actual biblical term here, but not a lot of information out there on what a deacon actually is. They're employed by the Catholic Church, but they're kind of just like a mini helper priest. I don't fully understand it. I just know that is a classification under priest. But that really kind of does it for the hierarchy structure of the Catholic Church, where you have Pope all the way down to deacons. And it's not all that confusing once you look into it and understand how basic that structure is. But that leads us into some of the terms that we're going to talk about. And the first four are ones that we've already discussed, but I want to make sure you have a pretty good understanding of, because you'll probably hear them. The first one is the Eucharist. Again, just a fancy name for communion, fancy name for Mass. Don't really understand why they changed it like that. Then you have Protestant, and again, this is a term that I really despise, because they came up with it to kind of make us the other, to say, oh, they're not the Catholic Church, so they're Protestant. And it groups in anybody who's not in the Catholic Church. But they did it because, like, oh, you broke off from us. And a lot of churches, yeah, the Lutheran Church, absolutely, they directly broke off. The Anglican Church, yes, they absolutely broke off, and that's what we'll look at in the next video. But that's not what happened with us. We went back to what the actual church was doing. So I really hate that word Protestant. But heresy, and this is a word that could even be used to, I think it might be a biblical word. I should look that up. But heresy just means anything against the Catholic Church when you're talking Catholicism. Anybody who disagrees, what this video is heresy. And then you have clergy. Clergy is everything we just talked about. All of the hierarchy structure, you have two categories. You have clergy and you have laymen. So if you work in the Catholic Church, if you're a deacon all the way up to a pope, you are a member of the clergy. If not, you are a layman. So that's where you get the phrase in layman's terms. So can you put it into terms where a non-priest could understand it? You have liturgy. Not really sure why they changed this word or made this word up, but It might be a legitimate. I don't know. I've just never heard it before, but it's a formal public worship. And in talking about the Catholic Church, is the only place I've ever seen it. But it's just simply a formal public worship. Then you have vestments, which is just the robes with all the pictures that we saw with clergy members. They all have special looks, different dress type things, and they're called vestments. So, and then there is a Jesuit. This one was kind of interesting to me, and I've heard this word a lot, and I had no idea what it meant. But basically, all it means is they went to a specific school. And there's a long history of it, kind of confusing, about how it's the Society of Jesus is what they call themselves. But really, it's just different institutions of higher learning that have taken on a Jesuit status. There are actually 28 universities in the United States, and I was, I assumed it was specific Catholic universities that only priests went to, but I mean, it's Boston College, Georgetown. There's some very well-known colleges that are known as Jesuit universities. So if you are a priest that attends these universities, you are known as a Jesuit. Um, if you just attend them, then that's what it is. That being said, I know Boston College, especially, has a very heavy Catholic presence. I think Duke does, and I'm sure Georgetown, since it's a Jesuit university, does. But you have to be both. You have to be a priest and go to these schools, and then you're a Jesuit. And then there are these three: nuns, monks, and saints. And these are ones that, like, you assume you know what they are, but what are their real roles? And that's a good question. Nuns, my understanding of them, and again, I want to make this statement before I go any farther because I meant to make it earlier that a lot of the videos that you see or books that you read, and I've done a lot of both of them, the Catholic Church is not doing a great job at reaching out to new people. It assumes a level of baseline knowledge. So it throws out these words like Jesuit and liturgy and assumes that you know what they are. So if you don't know what they are, it can be very difficult to kind of pick up along the way. So a lot of times I use the phrase "my understanding is" because I don't have that baseline knowledge before I started studying this, and sometimes it's really hard to describe what these are. But my understanding of a nun is a female priest. They don't have the power of a priest, but they are there to do the work of the Catholic Church, basically a lower on the totem pole worker. But it doesn't make a lot of sense for women to be nuns anymore because they now allow female priests. So I don't really completely understand that. And monks are a whole bag of worms. And I thought monks were only like Hindu or that kind of thing. And there are monks in that kind of those religions also. But a Catholic monk basically separates themselves off from the world. The guy that we're going to look at next week, Martin Luther, was actually a monk. And they separate themselves off from the world to separate themselves from any kind of comfort, really. In looking up these things, I heard stories of they would live in these cells, basically. And I mean, they go outside, but they had these rooms. They would sleep on the floor because a mattress was a comfort. And they would actually rotate these rooms, rotate cells. So they'd go to the next one and go to the next one. So they never felt a sense of ownership over that room, which is very extreme. But that was the extent that they take it, and that I mean, it's admirable, but it's useless, I guess. And then you have saints, and if somebody can get a Catholic to explain saints to me, I would love that. Because they do recognize that the Bible says that we are all saints. They recognize that, they accept that, but at the same time, some are more saintly than others. And what I mean by that is like the Catholic Church has purgatory, which purgatory is probably something you've heard before, whether or not you understand it completely. And purgatory is where you go in between earth and heaven, because you're not good enough to go straight to heaven. You have to go to purgatory and burn your sins off. And then once you've burned your sins off, you can go to heaven. And we'll talk next week about how they would sell you you could give money to the Catholic Church and your relative would spend less time in purgatory. But basically, a saint is somebody who the Catholic Church has said they skipped purgatory, they're in heaven. They're 100% in heaven. I don't know how they think they can say that, but that is more or less what a saint is. And then if you're looking at the Prezi, you can see here the 9 additions to the Catholic Church or the Catholic Bible. The first one here, Tobit. It's a fairly interesting story. It might be worth it just to go watch some videos on it on YouTube to get the general idea of it, but I'm not sure why it would need to be added. Then you have Judith Barak I think those two are going to be in their own separate category. And think when you hear these are they have a general timeline, but think of them kind of like First, Second Kings, First, Second Chronicles, First, Second Samuel. It's kind of a collection of stories that all run through together. But you move on from there. Wisdom, Sirach. Not sure how you pronounce that one. First and Second Maccabees. They're all books of wisdom, books of poetry. So I mean, one of them is called Wisdom. But think Psalms and Proverbs, that kind of thing. They're books like that. And then you have Esther and Daniel expanded upon. So that is the hierarchy, terminology, and Catholic Bible. So, like I said, I'll make one more of these for the Reformation, and then we'll cover any questions that y'all might have. We'll cover those at a different time on Zoom coming up. So we will still meet Wednesday night for Zoom, and we will do this video, another video, sometime within this week on the Reformation movement within the Catholic Church, and then we'll come back and start doing Sunday classes on Zoom. I hope y'all got something from this. Sorry that it was not as nice as I wanted it to be, but I just closed out my Prezi and saw my face on here and remembered that I trimmed my beard, and I feel like I look like an idiot. So, all right. See y'all.